Welcome to Monologues by Hassie, where I'm going to be dropping unsolicited brain dumps from the depths of my grey matter. I'll talk about life, money, society, and self-development, plus whatever else lies up there, whilst hopefully not getting cancelled in the process. Not too long ago, I was asked the all-important question of how much money are you currently making? Now, for context, I did leave my software engineering job a few months ago, and for the past 2 months, I've been traveling where I have begun what I was planning to do all along when I quit my job, which is go full-time into exploring new avenues, starting from software engineering products that I can be solely responsible for. So my goal this year is to get a lot of practice building, launching, selling, and marketing digital products, which is a very rounded experience. And I realized the best way for me to go get this was to work on smaller systems which I could take full responsibility for, because it is going to give me much more exposure to all of these things that I've just spoken about than being an engineer in a larger corporation where majority of what I worked on was smaller features and parts of a much larger system, which of course they were very important, but I realized there was something lacking in my career, and it was something I really wanted to do, was to take responsibility for something in its entirety, and not just take responsibility for the technical aspects, but to go beyond that, to create something that people truly love using, and to create something that people are aware of, awareness being created through sales and marketing. So I realized there's a lot of skills that I personally wanted to develop, and the best way for me to do that was to ironically quit my day job. And here's where that question comes in. How much money are you currently making? Well, the answer is I'm not making anywhere near as much as I was. When I did quit my job, I put myself through this thought experiment. And the thought experiment went something like this. It's in 10 years' time, there are two extremes of yourself. One extreme has the exact same job that you just left, and you're making exactly the same money. You haven't really gone anywhere, but you're doing okay. You know, you've had the same job. You've been working it for 9 to 10 years, and you know you're doing great. It was a great job, and provided that salary kept up with inflation, I'm sure it would have been meh. Okay, but I don't truly believe that. Now, the other version of me was this hyper-realistic version of me doing all these cool things. Imagine like Tony Stark crossed with Winston Churchill. I'm running companies, I'm inventing things, I'm running countries. So it is this really crazy vision that I had of all these cool things that I would love to do. So I'm making this huge impact. And I thought, if both those versions of me would look back at this period of time where I quit my day job and sanctioned that the next 9 months, you are only going to work on whatever you want to work on, and you're going to explore new possibilities. Would either of those two people, the two alternate versions of me, the two extremes, in 10 years, would either of those people regret the decision that you're taking now? And the reason is they wouldn't. And this brings me back to the intent of the question, which I did clarify. The question was, how much money are you making? And it was phrased in the word, the intent was, are you doing better than you were 6 months ago? And the lens, the focus of reference, was in the micro time scale. It is saying that, how are you doing now relative to 6 months ago? It was a question designed to gauge how I'm doing based off the short term in the grand scheme of things. But one thing I've found helpful is to stretch your time horizons, because that's how I made the decision to do what I'm doing now. And by stretching the time horizon, you change the way that you look at certain decisions, because there are many decisions which look very questionable on the short term, in the short time, in a micro time scale. And when you stretch it out to the macro, sometimes those questionable decisions in the micro opened up the possibility to have these wins in the macro. And that is exactly why I've decided to do what I'm doing. It is a very educated gamble. Of course, nothing is guaranteed. There is no certainty in life. But one thing I was certain of is if I kept doing what I was doing, I could definitely say goodbye to that hyper realistic version of myself, because based on that trajectory, you already kind of knew what was coming. And it's not that it wasn't great, but again, as I said, I do have this future version of myself that is this combination of Tony Stark and Winston Churchill, right? Having this amazing impact. And what I've realized is the questioner was asking this in the short-term perspective, because their view of me being successful is, are you making six figures? And some people find it hard to do anything without external compensation. And this is a delayed gratification thing. If you need to be remunerated to do anything in your life, and there is nothing that you do for yourself outside of the context of somebody paying you for it, I would say that is a very problematic way to live. And I think everyone, if you're listening to this, ask yourself the question, if I were going to get exactly $0 tomorrow, if my employer was going to stop paying me, if I was going to stop earning money from whatever I'm doing, what would I do? And that's a very tough question. For a lot of people, that's going to be a very tough question to ask. But all of a sudden, ironically, I've put myself into a position where, I've only been going absolutely hard out and doing basically more than full-time hours for the last 4 weeks. I've built one software MVP of a desktop application, and I had a lot of fun. That is not going to be publicly released, but it is something that I will likely use myself, merely to prove that I could do it. And I'm currently working on an Android mobile application, which will be publicly released. And here's the thing, I'm not being paid for any of these things. What I've decided to do is take on more tasks where there is a very high risk of failure, and where any rewards I get will be significantly delayed. And if we look at something like a mobile application that gets released on Google Android Play Store or Google Play Store, or on the Apple, the Apple Store where you buy apps, majority of the applications that are out there do not make money. In fact, I do not expect to make money. So I've never, as a software engineer, I worked on a lot of back-end software, and I was more behind the scenes in terms of what functionality do we need to have to enable calculations, how can we optimize the storage of data. That's what I was dealing with in my corporate job. And all of a sudden, I'm here developing a mobile application, which is relatively simple. So the first application I'm working on is a gamified meditation application, and conceptually incredibly simple. But there's a lot that's involved in taking something like that, taking that idea, implementing it, getting it onto the App Store, and then marketing it and selling it. And 99.9% of the time, even I know this app is going to be a complete flop. It's going to be a complete failure. In fact, I believe if I go and make another 12 apps after this, they are all going to be complete flops, complete failures. Here's the thing. By merely going and failing in this way, so in the short term, in the micro, what it looks like I'm doing will be a failure. Both financially, so if we go back to that first question, how much money are you making? Financially, it will be a failure, because if we look at what I'm doing outside of contracting work, which is obviously I'm getting remunerated for my hours, which I have made sure is extremely limited. I've deliberately tried to price myself out of the market by making myself available for a very short amount of time and have rates that are high enough where only people who really need me and who value small amounts of my input will hire me. The reason I've done that is so I can incentivize working on the things which no one is going to pay me for today. And I realized by creating an application that fails, it actually changes the paradigm I operate in. Because yes, maybe the first application I launch is going to be a flop, and so will the next 11 applications after that. Maybe it'll be the next 99 applications, but here's the thing. Once I've built one application, I realize my identity of myself will change. I will go from somebody who, as a software engineer, was never really confident with designing front-end systems, the stuff that people interact with, who'd never worked on a commercial end-to-end solution, so taken responsibility for an entire platform. I will have gone from somebody who had these kind of limiting beliefs in my head to somebody who says, wow, I can actually launch an app. Here's how long it took me for the first one. Now that I know how to do it and I worked out all the kinks, it's going to take me a fraction of the time it took me the first time. So I've significantly increased my odds of success in the future. But the only way to get there is to fail today. It's to fail in the micro. And it is a failure in the micro, but here's the thing, when you stretch that time horizon out to the macro, it is no longer a failure. And there are many historical examples of where there have been decisions which have been questionable in the short term, but have been vastly profitable in the long term. If I take American history, for example, one of the strokes of genius was Thomas Jefferson buying Louisiana from Napoleon. That decision got him a lot of criticism at the time, both for whether it was worth it. So the Americans didn't even want access to all of Louisiana. They really just wanted the port of New Orleans. They wanted to make sure that they could cross the Mississippi. But they ended up buying the whole territory. And there are questions of whether it was constitutional for Thomas Jefferson to go and expand the US territory by purchasing the French claim to the territory of Louisiana. But he did it. He went ahead with it. And if they hadn't have done that, they wouldn't have enabled their expansion westward and had the territory that they had access to. And one could definitely make the argument that if America did not have access to all of that territory, directly from the Louisiana Purchase and what happened after that as they expanded even further westward, all the way to the Pacific Ocean, if America hadn't made that decision back then in 1803 to purchase Louisiana, they would not have become the power that they are today. Because a lot of those resources, access to those lands, to the resources they had, enabled the growth of industrial America. And therefore, what looked like a very bad micro decision, and one of the reasons that a lot of states were unhappy about the Louisiana Purchase was they thought it would cause a political imbalance. They didn't realize that it was going to fuel their country for the next 200 years. So it was an incredibly good decision in the long term. It just looked very questionable in the short term. In my own personal life, I have seen friends who have made decisions where even I have questioned it. I had a friend who quit his corporate engineering job as well. He took 5 months off and he focused on his hobbies. He'd go out and read, journal, focus on all the things, working on your self-work, that type of self-improvement that maybe gets neglected where we're in the day-to-day grind. And the next thing you know, he's got an even better job that makes more money, that gives him more opportunity, that gives him more freedom, and he gets to work with a bigger team, and there is so much great opportunity. But to a lot of people, him taking 5 months off work probably looked like insanity. But it was a great decision. And so it's one of those things where external observers might look at something in the micro, and it looks like an absolutely horrible decision. Maybe if not horrible, at the very least they're questioning it, because they're looking at metrics over a micro time span. But here's the thing, if the person who's made that decision has put some thought in it, chances are, in the macro, over the long term, there is some significant benefit there that you cannot see in the day-to-day. And that is what I mean when I talk about micro losses, macro wins. It is an extreme form of delayed gratification. It is, in fact, it's not even delaying a pleasure. You're basically saying, my failures today are actually going to open doors for me tomorrow. And I'm willing to pay that price and to take that gamble. Because it's like all things. I've always said the biggest risk is not investing. And that goes the same thing. Like for me, the biggest risk would have just been to stay safe in my job. That is a bigger risk than me quitting my job, tanking my income, and working on these digital products. Because I know that even if I fail this entire year and get nowhere, I can go back to my corporate engineering job. But even if I go back to my corporate engineering job, or a corporate engineering job, I will have developed a skill set that I did not have prior. I will still have better opportunities in that line of work. But then this opens up even bigger doors potentially. Because maybe this means even if I do go into a corporate engineering job, again, shades of gray, maybe I now have the capacity and I have more income streams that will allow me to take another period out of traditional work and maybe change the way I'm working. Maybe it's going to lead to something bigger. But for now, I'm happy to take the micro loss. Why? Because I stretched out my time horizon. So my prompt to those of you listening to this is think about decisions that people have made around you, which are good decisions now, but maybe you even questioned them in the past. Think about things where maybe you were prejudiced against something that somebody else around you was doing. And then ask yourself, is there something that you're holding off doing because you've got a micro time scale? and take that thing that you're holding off doing and run some thought experiments, much like I did, and say, if I stretch this time horizon out, is it okay to fail today? And if the answer to that question is yes, then you should probably go and do that thing that you are putting off. Because if you truly believe that that micro loss that you are hesitating, that you are unwilling to engage in today, could potentially lead to a macro win that is better than your current reality, then you should definitely go do that. And that's where I'm going to leave it today. And I'm wishing all of you listening to this great success on all your endeavors. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.